Hi, and welcome to our next seminar in our Plant Day seminar series. Please bear with us on the slim chance there are any unforeseeable technical challenges. This series is being brought to you today by Plant Day and ASPB. My name is Melanie Binder, and I'm your host for today's seminar, Talking Plants, Plant Science Communication in a Digital World. Today's speaker is Claire Hopkins, Content and Community Manager at Brilliant Botany. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few things just to make sure you get the most out of attending today's seminar. Please feel free to ask questions using the chat box in your GoToTraining control panel on the right. These questions will be read and answered periodically by Mary Williams during the seminar as we transition from one topic to the next. A recording of this seminar will be made available along with all associated materials within a few days. If you need technical assistance during this webinar, please email Melanie Binder at mbinder@aspb.org. I'll put my email address in the chat box as well. And now I'd like to turn the seminar over to Claire.
All right, hello everybody. As Melanie said, my name is Claire and I am a plant science communicator. And first off, thank you so much for attending today, and it's exciting that so many people are interested in science communication. So I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about me. So I studied at the University of Vermont for my undergrad. I studied plant biology and English. So at the time I was thinking maybe I would want to go into science writing, which I kind of am now, but at first I wasn't sure kind of what I was going to do with my degree. And I actually have also taken several classes in museum studies, which I found really valuable in terms of the education aspect of that. There's a lot of overlap between museum education and skills that you need for doing science communication. And then in terms of working in the botanical field, I've worked in herbarium collections a lot. I've worked at the Steere Herbarium in New York and then the Harvard University Herbaria, doing a lot of digitization work for them. So I have a lot of experience with handling a lot of specimens in a short amount of time, and contributing to databases, which are really great. And it's fun being able to look back at that work and then see the GPS distributions and things like that of the specimens that I have digitized. In addition to that herbarium experience, I've also worked in nature education. I worked as a teacher for Mass Audubon for a little bit, doing tide pool education as well as salt marshes. That was a really great in terms of building some of my education skills, and also getting to learn a lot about plants as well as kind of ecosystems in that area. Right now, I actually work as the education coordinator on a farm. So Brilliant Botany, my work isn't actually my day job. I'll talk about this a little bit more in terms of careers in science communication, but Brilliant Botany is what I do in my spare time on weekends, and it's really a passion project for me. And then this is just one of my favorite photos in terms of doing science communication work. Beginning of last year, I went to Humboldt Redwood State Park in California because redwood trees are my absolute favorite plant. They're one of the plants that I can talk about for a very long time. Not surprising that I can talk about plants extensively. But this is a great photo because I have photographer friends, which I highly recommend if you can acquire those. So now I'm going to talk about Brilliant Botany, which I mentioned is my big passion project that I do in my spare time. So this is Brilliant Botany as it exists right now. I have a web platform where you can kind of links off to all the different branches of the things that I do, which includes YouTube, a blog. I really like to accumulate resources for folks, which you can see on the navigation bar at the top, some of the different things. But this is how it is now. I started Brilliant Botany back in 2011 when I was actually still in undergrad. And my joke is that I loved talking about plants so much, but my friends were getting tired of it, so I decided to tell the internet instead. So I started on the Tumblr platform, which is a blogging platform, but it's a little bit unique in that it's usually shorter posts, and people, what they do is they kind of curate their own blog by reblogging what other people have created. So people generally, they're scrolling through a feed, they want something short, generally they want something visual, so very picture heavy. So what you're seeing on the screen cap right here is a couple of my videos, but oftentimes my content was a picture of my own or that I had sourced from the internet somewhere with some kind of really interesting botanical fact. The shortcoming there is that you really couldn't get deep into a topic because people didn't really have the attention span on this platform to really dig into something, whatever it may be. So it's more fast-paced, but it was really visual. So it was a really great place to learn some skills, and I built a community there because it turns out, of course, that like you folks, there are a lot of plant biology folks and horticulturists and gardeners who really want a community online. So I started off, with just a couple of followers, and now I have over 50,000. Some of them are spam. It's how it goes on Tumblr, but it's really great seeing how vibrant a community there is there. So I mentioned that Tumblr was really difficult in terms of doing complex topics, but YouTube, which I was already familiar with, and I'll talk about more in depth as a platform in a bit, was a really great option for doing more complex topics. So I decided to start a YouTube channel. The first videos I actually did, which aren't available anymore, were 2 or 3 videos I did while working at the Steer Herbarium in New York City. They encouraged us interns to do outreach projects. So I did a couple of videos about herbaria and what we did, and that was kind of getting my feet wet in the world of YouTube. And it's very funny for me going back and watching them because they're not great. It's also great to see because it shows that it is a skill that you have to learn, and there's nothing wrong with starting off a little weak and then you learn as you go. And the other pros of YouTube that I really liked is it really has a strong user base with the community, and it also makes it a little bit easier to be seen. It is a little bit oversaturated, but since there's already community using the platform, you do have that option of tapping into those people. All right, so I'm going to pause here. I know Melanie mentioned that if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box, and I do encourage you to ask questions. I love questions. Generally, when I'm teaching like a live program with live people in person, I pause for questions very frequently. So do we have any yet?
No, we don't yet, but
all right.
I'm keeping an eye on the chat box.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to talk about now is kind of, there's many different ways to approach doing science communication, and what works for one person doesn't always work for everybody, but I have 3 of the basic rules that I would recommend starting with. And the first one is to not qualify your enthusiasm. And what I mean by this is when you're talking about a topic, maybe if you're a scientist, if it's your research or just something that you want to tell people about, don't ever use the word boring. This is particularly important for kids because kids have no preconceptions about whatever the topic is. I know it seems hard because plants are often considered boring, but if it's a 5-year-old kid and you just start talking about how cool this nettle is or whatever it is, they're gonna believe you because they have no idea that, oh, plants might be boring. And even with adults, you don't need to address the fact that, oh, they might think this is boring. What you need to focus on is your enthusiasm, what's cool about it, and if you're charismatic and tell them about it, they're gonna latch onto your charisma and also be excited about it. And then number 2, think critically about language. Now, this is one I think that comes up a lot when talking about science to the public. It also accounts if it's people in the science community, but being in science means inherently using a lot of terms that the general population isn't familiar with. And I want to say it doesn't mean that you absolutely can't use those terms, but you want to make sure that you explain them and give them context. And you really want to, but don't get bogged down by them. Really focus on like explaining and being excited and kind of just communicating with the person instead of trying to give them every tiny detail. That said, you also don't want to water down what it is you're talking about too much because whoever it is, they still are an intelligent person, and if you explain it right, they're going to get it. So you don't need to, unless they're 4, you don't need to talk to them like they're 4 years old. And even then, 4-year-olds don't like to be condescended to. And then number 3 is don't forget the people. Now this is something I try to incorporate into my work a lot, and there's 2 facets of this. And one is that it's really beneficial for folks to see that it's people doing science. It's tough because in scientific literature, by necessity, you have to kind of remove the people from the situation. You don't say the lab technician pipetted the solution. You say the solution was pipetted in your methods. But folks, especially kids, need to see that it's people who do science, and especially if you're trying to draw people into the field, they want to be able to see themselves doing whatever it is you're doing. This picture on the right is Rose E. Collum, one of my favorite historical botanists. She was the first botanist hired by Grand Canyon National Park in the 20th century. She was a really rad lady who lived in Arizona. She became one of the leading self-taught experts on native plants in the area. She basically would wander the landscape collecting, looking around, and they hired her on a grant to collect specimens in the park for them so they could see what they had. She also was really active in the county fair circuit and won a lot of awards for her jams, which I find delightful. So she seemed like a very awesome lady and very self-starting because she just sent away for books and corresponded with a lot of famous botanists at the time. And as well as historical people and giving context, what being in science or science communication, networking and community are really important. I have friends who are also science communicators, and it's really great to network. You can collaborate or just chat because it means having someone who kind of understands where you're coming from and what sort of things you're dealing with when working in science communication, which will kind of come more into play when I talk about platforms. So right now, what we're going to do is watch a video by this creator named Alex Danis. She is a genetics grad student, but because I can't play videos within my presentation and have you hear the audio, what we're going to do is post this link in the chat box. You're going to want to go out of the training that you're watching. I'm going to go quiet for the minute and 50 seconds it takes to watch the video, and then you can come back in here and I'll talk about it. So if you can, and I will tell you when to start, but is the link in the chat box?
Yes, it is, and I managed to get it in my browser, so.
Perfect. All right, so I'm going to go quiet for 2 minutes, and then we will come back and chat. All right, I'm going to give it a couple seconds for people to finish up. All right, so hopefully everybody had the chance to watch that video from Alex Danis. And the reason I had us watch this is that I really love the style of science communication that she does. So like I said, Alex is a genetics grad student, and she does a lot of different types of videos. This one, for example, is from her What Is This Thing series. So she'll take a object or piece of equipment or something like GFP from her lab and do an explanation of it. And the things from the basics of SciComm that I just gave you that I really think she embodies are, she really thinks about language. She's not talking down to you, but she does offer clear explanations for each of the things that she's talking about, like genes, and not overcomplicating it so that kind of the layman can understand it. And I also find that she is very charismatic and doesn't apologize for what she's talking about. And of course, the idea of showing people doing science, that's kind of inherent in her channel, in that she is the person doing science and she reflects a lot on the experience of doing science and also what it's like being a grad student. So if you're someone who is interested in being a grad student, is a grad student, or knows someone who is, a really great channel for that as well. All right, do we have any questions at this point?
Yes, we just got a question.
Yay!
Okay. How do you worry about scholarly trip-ups? She said the protein
Ooh.
was described in 1994, and it was, but it was first described over a decade earlier.
Ooh, that is a really good question. So that the worst thing to be is wrong on the internet, as many of you probably know. So I try not to be too hard on myself when it comes to accuracy. Obviously, I source everything as much as I can and try to be as accurate as possible. But if someone, especially on YouTube in the comments, says, oh, actually, this thing is wrong, generally my approach is, oh, thank you for telling me that. If you can add a note somewhere on whatever the creation is about correcting it, that's great. But be forgiving, and everybody's imperfect, and we can't get everything right 100% of the time. Obviously, good sources are really important for that, but yeah, be forgiving and don't take the trolls. And if anybody's unfamiliar with the term trolls, those are folks who are deliberately inflammatory. I'm fortunate to have not encountered a lot of them, but if you do come across some who give you a hard time for a slip up, don't take it too hard. All right. Any other questions?
No, but I think that is a really good point, because I do a bit of writing for general audiences, and you have to be, so worried to make the scientists happy that you get every little I dotted and T crossed. But if you worry so much about that, you make everything so convoluted and incomprehensible, it doesn't work as science communication. So sometimes there's a bit of tension, not between accuracy, but between the detail and precision that scientists want in everything.
Absolutely. I once had, this was a while back, but particularly when I was more active on Tumblr, anytime I would list a scientific family, I would always put the family Solanaceae, because I wanted it to be clear to people who weren't familiar with nomenclature that it was a family and kind of that it was a grouping. And I had someone who very nastily informed me I shouldn't be putting family because it was already inherent in the term Solanaceae, but I'm going to make that concession to be more accessible to folks. So definitely, the precision is definitely also an aspect.
And I think I've heard from that person too.
Yep. All right. All right. So next we're going to talk about, so if you're somebody who wants to do science communication, is already doing science communication and wants to kind of evaluate methods, the first step that kind of goes hand in hand with the next one, but is choosing an audience, because there's a lot of people you can talk to in science communication or anything that you're producing, and you can't really talk to literally everyone. So the first thing maybe you want to think about is, if you are, for example, a scientist and you want to talk about the work that you're doing, maybe there's a particular audience that you think your work would be really helpful to. You could be very broad in that you want to talk to maybe like the general adult public in English-speaking countries, or maybe your work would be really great for kids and you want to make content for kids. But then also you do have to take into account who you're interested in working with. I personally love working with kids, particularly in live programming, but if you're someone who doesn't really like working with kids, that's totally fine. You can keep in mind that you want to work with older folks, adults, whoever it may be. And sometimes it may be divided by age, or maybe it's divided by kind of what they do for work. Maybe you only want to talk to other scientists who do similar work or different work, or maybe you want to talk to politicians, whoever it is you want to target. You want to keep that in mind when you're thinking about what platform you want to do your work on. So maybe you thought of an audience. For me personally, I work with a lot of different audiences. Like I said, I do live programming with kids. A lot of my YouTube and Tumblr content is consumed by people in their 20s and 30s who are established in the field, or folks who are teenagers and interested in becoming botanists. And that's actually, those teens are one of my favorite demographics, because they're very enthusiastic and they do really need the resources to figure out what they're doing, and I'm very happy to give them advice. So there's a lot of different, maybe you're going to be working with one audience, or maybe it'll be a little bit more multifaceted. So when looking at platforms, and when I say platform, I mean what website or form your science communication is going to take. In my case, YouTube is the most prominent one at the moment. But what you want to think about is how much time you have to devote to the science communication. Maybe you only have an hour a week where you can sit down and write something. Totally fine. Just want to remember that. You also want to think about what your strengths are. Are you a really strong writer? Maybe you really like working with audio. Maybe you really want to work with video. Thinking about what you would enjoy doing, because something like this, I'll talk about whether it's your full-time job or it's something you do in your spare time later, but you also want to keep in mind to keep it sustainable. If you're like me and you're doing it in your spare time, you really want it to be something you enjoy doing. And then the last thing is what equipment you have available to you. Now, presumably all of you have access to an internet connection, so that's a good starting point, but some forms of communication do necessitate equipment. Even if you're doing video, even a nice smartphone with a video camera can do the job, absolutely, but that is something that you'll need. So thinking about what resources you have available. So with those things in mind, I'm going to talk about a couple of the platforms that I'm familiar with, YouTube, of course, being the most prominent. So like I said, I moved to YouTube because I wanted to tackle more complex topics and also tap into that community. So some of the things I really enjoy about YouTube is it's very accessible to folks because YouTube is an established platform. It also, in terms of accessibility for people with maybe who need closed captioning, things like that, it's fairly easy to add those things. I'm really big on making sure my content is accessible. It also has a really great established community. There is a science community on YouTube, which I'll talk about in a bit. And then YouTube does work to offer you resources and tools for creating. It's things like royalty-free music. When you're making videos, you want to make sure that you have the rights to any music or audio that you use. And YouTube has a small library of music that you can use for free, which is really great. They also have courses and like guides to different types of creating and growing your channel and things like that. Now, there are some cons to making content on YouTube. It's very competitive. There's a lot of people making content, and so it's a little bit saturated. Now, this picture on the right is of me at VidCon, which is a yearly conference in Anaheim, California, and it's a conference for online video. I can't remember how many people attend now. It's in the thousands, but it's a massive conference. But it is a lot of fun. The conference is actually kind of fandom oriented in that a lot of community members go with the hopes of meeting YouTubers that they're fans of. However, they also do offer a creator track ticket, which is what I did, and I'm going again this year, which is really rewarding because you get to network with people and also learn about creating. So it's a really great motivating tool and a learning tool going to something like that. And now you may have seen as well in the headlines recently that there's been some controversies over advertising on YouTube. YouTube is a very many varied place, and there are of course some videos on YouTube that are not so savory, and advertisers pay money to YouTube to have their ads go up on pages, but they found out that sometimes their ads were going next to videos that they absolutely did not want their brand affiliated with. So a bunch of advertisers actually pulled all of their advertising from YouTube, and advertising is one of the big ways of getting revenue if that's something you're hoping for on YouTube. There are other ways, which I'll talk about in a bit, but that was one of the things that has happened recently on YouTube. So we are going to watch one more video. So it's going to be the same procedure. Link will show in the chat box. This is one of my videos. Now, the reason I picked this one is it's actually from the Project for Awesome in 2016. And the Project for Awesome is a charity marathon in December every year. It's run by John and Hank Green, who also run the conference I was just talking about. Essentially, they encourage creators to make videos about topics that they're or charities that they are passionate about, and then encourage everybody to watch them. And then there's also a voting system where the top 20 videos, those charities get a portion of the proceeds that are raised. So I'm very passionate about pollinators, since bees are great. They need plants, we need plants. So I talk a lot about pollinator conservation. So this video is about the Pollinator Partnership, an organization that helps with pollinator conservation around the world. So we will be watching this again, and this video is just over 2 minutes if I'm remembering correctly. Yep, 2:34. So I will go quiet for the 2:34 it takes to watch it, and then we will come back and chat about it. All right, so hopefully everybody had the chance to watch that video. So that's an example of the kind of content I create. So it's just me working on my content. I actually do my editing in iMovie, which is the free editing software that comes with Mac machines, because most of my editing is pretty basic. A lot of folks who are established on YouTube use more complex editing. It's all about what you need. I find something straightforward and simple is easier for me to use and get things done. So here are a couple of the factors of creating for YouTube, if this is something that you choose to go with. There's a lot of different styles. The video we just watched is kind of a face-to-camera style, where I'm just kind of standing in a shooting space and talking to the camera with a little bit of other stuff thrown in. There's a lot of folks who do vlogs as well. I do that sometimes. That's when you go out and about and usually holding the camera, pointing at your face and going about your day. I'll often do that where I'm out on a hike and looking for plants and do a video that way. Scripting is something that you have to think about with YouTube. If you're doing vlog style, you don't necessarily need to script or research, but if you're doing the type of talking to the camera that I'm doing, scripting is usually very helpful. Something unique to science as well, scripting is often integral because you can't mix up words oftentimes because what you're saying needs to be accurate and true to the science. So I actually have a little tiny teleprompter now, which has helped tremendously because otherwise I'd have to be memorizing these scientific facts all in a string and it took a lot longer to film. Equipment-wise, I personally use a DSLR camera, but like I said, if you have a smartphone with a video camera, that will absolutely do the job for you. I also, like I said, have a teleprompter, and I do have a softbox lighting setup, which if you're not familiar with that, it's the kind of lights that they use for photography with like the big white faces on them that kind of provide really good light. And then I personally don't do any animation in my videos. I do graphics where it's still sorts of things, but if you remember from Alex's video, she had simple animations of the worms she was talking about and things like that, which can add to your video. So if that's a skill that you have, it's really advantageous for using it. So these are things to think about for YouTube. Starting off simple is always best. And I'll talk a little bit more about like consistency and things like that. But the two hardest things that I would recommend working on are audio quality. Having a lot of buzzing or poor audio quality will discourage people from watching your video. But that said, it's really hard to get good audio quality. Maybe you have your neighbor using a leaf blower all the time and there's nothing you can do about that. And the second is lighting quality. I often used to shoot outside because I didn't have a lighting setup, and the best light was, of course, natural light. But that added the complication of all of the sounds from the trees around me. So audio and lighting are kind of the two big factors that folks need to work on. And as I mentioned, I create by myself. However, there are many other ways that people create content and post to YouTube. Science IRL is a really great plant science channel on YouTube. I highly recommend you check it out. It's run by Molly Edwards, who is a grad student at Harvard. But I know she works with a team. So she's the host. She has somebody who helps her with filming, somebody who helps her with editing. If you know folks who have these skills and you want to work with, that's awesome because it kind of takes all the burden off of one person, and it also gives you a diverse skill set. And then another example is creating for an institution. So an example of this is the Brain Scoop with Emily Grassley. She originally worked with a production company out in Montana, but she now works out of the Field Museum. So she's funded by the Field Museum, which is a really, that's definitely a pro in terms of having stable funding, but then you do have limitations of the institution, whatever they may be. So, and also probably the resources in terms of editing and that sort of thing, but that's another avenue that people create content for. All right, do we have any questions at this point?
Two questions.
Sure.
So one of them is kind of a double question. Do you edit out pauses? That is, do you edit out pauses as you speak, breathe, inhalations, etc.?
Yes, so that's a really good question. In YouTube editing, I don't know if this is general editing, it's called a jump cut. So I will clip out any dead space, especially if I'm having to like roll back the teleprompter or something like that. It helps keep people engaged because there's no silences. That said, sometimes having some dead space or silence can work to your advantage, but I definitely do edit out any dead space.
And then the other one was, you mentioned something about good audio quality. Were you using a microphone built into your camera, or do you have an extra? I didn't see anything on your shirt, so you're obviously speaking forward to something.
So that's a really good question. Audio quality is something I definitely still struggle with. I have it on, so I used to use the built-in microphone for the camera, which depending on the setting does okay, but I do have a small external microphone that goes on top of the camera now. It's Rode brand, but there are many different brands. And it does have a windscreen muffler on it, which is good for when I'm out and about. So that has definitely helped. But I don't have a background in like audio editing, so it's a little bit of guessing. And you'll notice I also add background music in most of my videos. There was one, I had background music in this last video. And as I mentioned, the YouTube library of music, that's where it's from. And that actually can help with if you have white noise in the background. When I used to film outside and there was a lot of like the trees moving in the wind, which can be a little distracting, adding some background music can help mask that. So that's definitely a strategy as well.
Super, thank you.
All right, so I talked a lot about YouTube because that's where I make most of my content right now, but there are a lot of other great platforms that are an option. So blogging, written science communication is really, really great. It's also, if you don't want necessarily your face on camera, which is totally valid, it's a really good option. It's also a lot more flexible because you can kind of write whenever you want. Filming requires being like on your game, you need certain lighting, all that sort of thing, but writing is a lot more flexible. And there's a lot of different blogging platforms that you can choose from. I didn't go ahead and include those because there's so many. Tumblr is an example, but then there's Blogsplat, WordPress, all sorts of things. It also has a lot of accessibility because you don't have to worry about closed captioning for folks who might who are non-hearing or things like that, and you have a little bit more flexibility with that. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about a couple platforms. The first is Facebook. Now, so many people use Facebook, and I have I Effing Love Science as an example over here because they're an interesting platform because they're not always necessarily like scientifically precise, but they've really excelled on Facebook. I think they have over 6 million likes. I think if I remember the last time I looked at it, it's probably more. But it's just kind of an example of working the system. You can excel on Facebook. I personally don't really use Facebook that much. It's can be really hard to work with the algorithms. If you're a Facebook user you're familiar with, you don't necessarily see everything everybody posts all the time. So you kind of have to fight to get your content seen. So what I actually personally do is I'll have my Instagram posts automatically posted to Facebook because I want to have a little bit of content on there, but I find that the input there's not enough payoff for putting work on there. That said, a lot of folks are starting to post video to Facebook, and it's actually a big growing platform for video. And Facebook Live is becoming a thing as well. I'll talk about Periscope a little bit later, but that is, folks do use that for live streaming. And I actually use YouTube for live streaming occasionally too. I'll talk about funding in a little bit, but I've done a monthly live stream on YouTube, which is basically like a Google Hangout. But then it gets posted automatically to your channel with some of the folks who donate money to my platform. So Facebook is an option for live streaming, YouTube is as well. Now, podcasts. I don't personally have any experience creating podcasts, but I do listen to a lot of them. And they really have grown as a medium. They're really popular right now, and they do have the advantage of you can kind of consume them almost anywhere because you can listen to them while you're driving, while you're walking, something you can't necessarily do with video content, for example. And then similarly to writing, the production is a little bit more flexible. If obviously you need to be talking, but you don't necessarily need to be in front of a camera and having a setup for that. So it's definitely more flexible, and it's a really great option. Of course, it does have the disadvantage in terms of science that you don't get any visuals. So if you're talking about something that really benefits from having diagrams or photographs, you can't do that in podcasts. And then Twitter is a little bit unique. Twitter, of course, is better for networking. I do encounter a lot of science communication on Twitter. It's good for shorter posts, but I mentioned that it's really beneficial to network with folks in science communication, and Twitter is a really great venue for that. I am SciComm, IAMSCICOMM, is a Twitter account that's actually a rotating account. They have a different science communicator host it every week. Is a really great way to get into science communication and hear from folks. I hosted it once. It's a lot of fun because it's got a good following, so you can interact with a lot of people. And then Twitter also does have the advantage of being able to post photos and diagrams and visual things. All right, and as I mentioned, Periscope is a growing popular live streaming platform. So I have not yet used Periscope, but this is a screenshot of what in-app it looks like for your profile. And what I will be using it for is May 18th. There's a Botany Live event. It's actually happening, I think it's the 18th through the 21st. So they're encouraging folks like you, plant biologists, to live stream to kind of show what you work on, get people excited about plant science and plant biology. So what I'll likely be doing is on that Saturday, live streaming on a hike and talking about how I create videos and also talking about plants. So you can check out the botany.live is the link for where the info will be for that. So come hang out with us on Periscope. And I should also mention, I've encountered some field biologists who use Periscope, which has been really cool. I have a friend who is an ornithologist, and she used Periscope to show folks what she was working on, like out in the marshes, which was a really cool, easy way to get a feel for what she does when she's out in the field. So it can be a really good tool if you're studying out in the field. And then one of my favorites, which is ironic since I do a lot of digital content, is live programming. This picture on the right is of me at the Cambridge Science Festival. So what I did is I had this table here, and I was talking particularly about pollinator conservation, and I was handing out native wildflower seed for folks. And this is, I find it really fun. It does require a lot of energy. So if you're not an extroverted person, this might be really hard, because I was basically talking for 4 hours straight with people. But I think it's really beneficial for people to have a personal interaction when it comes to learning about science or thinking about what a scientist is like. I talk to a lot of kids at this, and also some like young adults and people like that, and just talking to them about science and things like that. And one of the biggest joys is people will come over and be so excited about bees or plants, and they've never really had someone to talk about it with. So I'm always really happy to facilitate that. But like I said, it does require a kind of specific skill set of being able to talk to people for a long period of time. I also do workshop type things for groups like the Girl Scouts, which are really fun, a little bit more sustainable because it's generally only an hour. But those are a lot of fun because it's showing, particularly with the Girl Scouts, I love working with young women and having them ask me questions about being a scientist in case they're interested in becoming one themselves. All right, so those were some of the platforms that are an option for doing science communication. A couple I didn't talk about were Instagram, which this is a screenshot of my Instagram on the right. I really enjoy Instagram. It's not necessarily a platform for sharing extensive information about something, but it is really fun for networking and just kind of connecting with people on a really basic level. I love posting pictures of plants that I come across with maybe with the ID on it for folks who would not know what it was, or posting pictures when I'm working events. On the little screenshot, that bottom right photo is actually a bee collection that I got from a viewer that I brought to the Cambridge Science Festival. And it's a sampling of all the native bees in New England, which is where I'm working out of. And then another popular platform is Snapchat, which I don't personally use. What I found with people is that they usually use it as a social platform, not necessarily where they're trying to get education or things like that. That doesn't mean you can't use it. It could be a really great option, similar to Periscope, for showing what you're doing in the field and things like that. So in some institutions like science museums and things like that do use it as well, especially for events or for advertising. All right, so closing in on the end here. So I have some general tips for creating whatever the platform is that you're using. Quality over quantity is definitely my first recommendation. Don't force yourself to write a ton of blog posts just to get them out there and kind of not source them correctly or research them as much. People want thought out content. That said, consistency in terms of your schedule is really important, and this is something I struggle with. People, especially on YouTube, they want to maybe know, okay, this creator posts every week. And they like knowing that, and it also keeps people engaged and keeps you on their mind if you want to keep them coming back. Again, this is one of the hardest things to do, because if you've got a busy week and you're making videos, it takes a lot of time. You might not have time to make a video that week. I also really recommend prioritizing accessibility. I'm a little behind on closed captions right now, but adding closed captions to your videos, for example, is a really great way of making them a little bit more accessible, both to folks who might be hearing impaired, but also to non-English speakers if you are an English speaker. I tend to talk very quickly, so I know that's tough for any of my viewers who might not be speaking English as their first language, but if they have closed captions, that can help because they can read what I'm saying in addition to listening to me talk. I mentioned a little bit about this, that equipment isn't the most important thing. I do have a DSLR camera, but and I do have a mic and things like that, but you don't need that to start out, and I would recommend not getting those to start out. You don't need to throw a lot of money at whatever it is you're doing. before you start. Start with the content and don't worry about equipment. And then don't worry about audience size. If you get too hooked on your visitor count or your subscriber count, it's not going to be as fulfilling. And what you don't want a lot of people who don't engage with you. It's better to have 5 people who comment on every video and start good discussions than 500 people who don't really seem engaged. One of the best things, especially for Tumblr, was interacting with people. It's more fun when the people are getting meaningful experiences. All right, and then a couple of things that are kind of specific to plant science communication that I've encountered that are challenging. Plant blindness, which is something that I talk about a lot about in workshops, which is when people look at a landscape, they don't necessarily think about the plants that they're seeing. I often show this picture of a mountain lion sitting in a tree, and I ask folks what they see, and they know it's a trick question, so usually they'll say something about the tree, but when people look at it, the first thing they notice is the mountain lion, and they don't think about, oh, I wonder what type of tree that is. I wonder what kind of moss is growing on that tree. So you kind of have to first get people to think critically about the plants that are around them, which can be really rewarding for people once they realize that there's plants everywhere. And then the second thing is image and source availability. One of the challenges of working on content that includes plants is getting images. And even if you're able to find images, them having proper rights, that's something if you're interested in, I'm not going to talk about today, but like finding images and the rights to using images, feel free to email me. I'll have my email at the end. But oftentimes those images are misidentified. And if I'm talking about a plant that I'm not really familiar with, I might not know that. So it's hard to find reputable images that have the proper identifications on them. And then this is a challenge for generally in science, but also plant science, is access to journal articles. If you're someone who is affiliated with an institution and you have library access, that's great. You probably can get to journal articles online. But if you're a freelancer or someone who happens not to have that sort of access, it can be difficult to get scientific sources to the extent that you need them. All right, a couple last things. So as I mentioned, I don't do plant biology as my day job. It's kind of a small field. The science communication is kind of a small field, but it is feasible. There are positions in science communication, whether it be as a journalist or organizations that literally do YouTube videos for science communication. There aren't many, but they are out there. But also science communication and the skills to do science communication are really, I think, useful in any position, whether it be giving a seminar or things like that and being able to talk to people. Or if you're someone who's just interested in blogging in your free time, that can still be really rewarding even if it's not your day job. So it all depends on kind of what commitment you're looking for. And if you're looking for science communication jobs, I can give recommendations for how to find them. Just feel free to email me. And then if you're someone like me who is doing it in your free time, but you really do need a revenue stream for it, for example, I need income to help with like the hosting for my website and equipment and things like that. I mentioned advertisement revenue is a little bit shaky at the moment, but crowdfunding is also a really good option. Patreon is a crowdfunding website where folks pledge a monthly amount, generally that's how it works, and they get access to a feed that generally has exclusive things on it, maybe behind the scenes photos, whatever it is you want. That Google Hangouts live stream I mentioned that I do was for Patreon supporters who gave a certain amount of money. We would just chat for 30 minutes once a month, and that was one of their perks for supporting Brilliant Botany, which I appreciate so much, and it really does help make it more sustainable. All right, and the last thing I have for you folks before we do questions is at this link, which you can look at, it'll stay up in perpetuity, is I put together a growing list of resources for science communication. So this includes links to really great YouTubers, because I often find that one of the best ways to get inspiration is to watch content or read content of all types. It doesn't even necessarily have to be science communication. But I've included a lot of great science communication YouTubers, including some of the ones I've mentioned today, and then a couple of resources for creating. And my favorite is the Internet Creators Guild. Now, this does have the downside that it does have a membership fee. So it's kind of intended for people who are already in the community, but they have really great interviews, exclusive podcasts, and resources on creating. And they also, when you join, you get access to a Slack platform, which is a chat platform if you're not familiar with it. And it is largely YouTube and video creator heavy, so keep that in mind. But it's really great for networking with folks and learning and getting advice. It's a really friendly community, and I found that it's really worth being a member. And there we have it. And now we are ready for questions.
Excellent. Well, I'll start with we've got three. I'll start with mine, which is really a comment. We recommend also to everyone in the plant biology community that you get involved in plante.org because this is
Yes.
a place where you can post your comments, your blogs, your videos. If you're posting them elsewhere and you want to share them more widely within the plant community, you can share your resources through Plante. And we're just about to have a major upgrade to the community site, which is going to make it so much more exciting and user-friendly. So watch your mailboxes, and by mid-June, we'll have a whole new look to the community site. But this is definitely one of the goals we have with Plante, is that people start sharing and creating plant science communication content through the site. Okay, that was your advertisement. So
And I
let's go to the
support it.
questions. Thank you, Claire. Very good.
I
Okay,
endorse
we'll go to the
Plante.
questions. Here's one. How do you decide the content and update yourself for the content?
So in terms of like what to make a video about, generally because I have the flexibility, I pick topics that I personally find interesting and engaging. And part of the reason for that is because I do this in my spare time, it needs to be something I'm excited about to be motivated to do it. That said, I've also done projects for specific reasons. The pollinator partnership video I showed you, I did for Project for Awesome. I also do get a lot of suggestions from viewers and requests from viewers. I used to get tons of requests for videos about carnivorous plants because people love carnivorous plants. So I did one about carnivorous plants. So I really try to get feedback from the community on what they're interested in, but also making sure the content is exciting to me because I will do the best job of creating it if I'm excited about it. In terms of doing research, if I'm understanding your question correctly, I use Google first thing, just to kind of get a feel for what the field I'm talking about is. And hopefully this isn't sacrilege to say this, but Wikipedia is great for learning about plants. There aren't many places where there's like a condensed information about maybe a particular species or family or genus, whatever it is a good starting point for me. I don't source Wikipedia, but I get kind of a feel for what I'm talking about and go from there. And then just a lot of sleuthing. I do personally have access to journal articles, so I'll use those. And I actually also keep a collection of textbooks on hand because even though I studied plant biology, since I'm not actively working on it every day outside of science communication, I can get a little rusty. So I like having textbooks about the basics on hand because oftentimes those will be really helpful. I have a copy of Campbell's Biology that I reference when I need to go back to the basics of something, be it plant biology or something else.
Excellent. Okay, here's one that I think may be being a bit of a devil's advocate.
Let's
If
hear
you
it.
do a YouTube search, you will find videos on everything. Do you feel it's worthwhile to put your voice/spin on topics, even though there are so many videos out there?
That's a really good question because, like I said, there is so much on YouTube. What I found for me is that, at least for plant science specifically, there aren't many people out there doing like thoughtful, quality communication. There are definitely a lot of people out there, but there is a community that I think if you can grab them really does want the content. And it is tough to kind of distinguish yourself at this point because there are a lot of different styles, all that sort of thing. I was fortunate. The reason I think I have a community built around at least my YouTube is since I started from Tumblr, some of those people followed me over to YouTube. And then actually the biggest way of getting folks is networking that I talked about. A lot of my followers found me through the Brain Scoop when I was mentioned in a video about female science creators on YouTube. And then something I didn't really talk about a lot, but you can do collaborations with YouTube people. I'm planning on doing one with Molly Edwards from Science IRL, and that way you can kind of tap into each other's audiences. So that's a way of getting people. And I do think it's worthwhile, but like you said, it is really, there are videos about everything. So you do have to think about how you're going to distinguish yourself and create valuable content.
Okay, and the final question, what is your opinion on science communication on new discoveries in plant science?
Ooh, I think it's beneficial. Now, I think, yeah, telling people about new discoveries is really valuable because it shows that the field is still growing and things are happening. Because I think a lot of people perceive that in science in general, we've already kind of figured out most of everything, which is absolutely not true. Any of us who are in the field know that. Especially some of the like flashier discoveries can really pull people in, which I consider a pro of that. I I can't remember the exact species, but a while ago I made a video about they were like finding pollination type activities in mosses with some invertebrates, which was really exciting. And yeah, I think it's really exciting and good for people to hear about progress that's happening. What that does make me think of too is one of the toughest topics to talk about in plant biology, at least I've found, is GMOs, because people have a lot of biases against GMOs, but I personally think as a concept, GMOs are great and necessary. So yeah, it can be kind of hard too, depending on what you're talking about, to kind of break down the barrier and get people to listen. So.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn this over to Melanie, but I just noticed I made a note that I was also supposed to mention that on the Planté site that I mentioned, we've built a network now on science communication. So hopefully all of you interested in science communication can join us there, and we can continue to ask questions and share resources and learn from each other. So thank you, Claire, and I'll turn this back over to Melanie.
Thanks, Mary. That's great information to share about our new Planté public pages. And yes, a big thank you to Claire for doing the seminar for us today, for sharing all this useful information and the links. And we also want to thank everyone for attending our seminar today. And as mentioned before, the recording for this, the link to this recording will be posted in the Planté community within the next few days. And also, please look for emails for us in the future announcing registration for upcoming seminars. And again, if you have any topics or ideas, please feel free to email us at community@planté.org for consideration. In our follow-up email to you, we'll include this information as well as a link to the discussion about this topic on Planté. And we invite you to join the discussion so we can continue the conversation with Claire, and it'll also give you the opportunity to ask additional questions about science communication. Thank you all very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you, and thank you again, Claire.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone, for listening.
Bye.